One of the different stories that came out this week by the Obama administration recently was the idea of putting Venezuela on a security threat list. It was reported by many mainstream media outlets and also very perplexing to say the least based on this coverage of how all of a sudden Venezuela is now considered a security threat. But on another note, we finally have an answer to the United States' response on supporting coups, or not supporting coups, I should say. And we could hear that straight from the Secretary, the Department of State Press Secretary, Jen Psaki, who recently said this about the United States' statement on supporting coups.
President Maduro last night went on the air and said that they'd arrested multiple people who were allegedly behind a coup that was backed by the United States. What is your response?
These latest accusations, like all previous such accusations, are ludicrous. As a matter of long-standing policy, the United States does not support political transitions by non-constitutional means. Political transitions must be democratic, constitutional, peaceful, and legal. We've seen many times that the Venezuelan government tries to distract from its own actions by blaming the United States or other members of the international community for events inside Venezuela. These efforts reflect a lack of seriousness on the part of the Venezuelan government to deal with the grave situation it faces.
It seems like she ignored pretty much most of American history. Now, what this video is going to be about is a short breakdown of just some of the examples of the United States supporting coups overseas that fit the agenda of corporations or politicians or banksters or people, basically wealthy people in positions of power to control governments overseas for their own benefit. Now, the first example that we'll do is the one in the most people are somewhat aware of, but not too familiar with, is the coup in Guatemala that took place in the 1950s, which was one of the first CIA operations in Latin America, the first of several operations in Latin America to overthrow democratically elected governments that were in Latin America for the interests of putting in a puppet government in place of that, which most of all the cases, or all the cases, were all democratically elected governments in Latin America or overseas for that matter, but didn't fit the agenda of the United States or certain corporations. Now, this case in Guatemala, which was overthrowing President Jacobo Arbenz Guzman, who was the second legally elected president in the Guatemalan history, didn't put along the talking points or didn't serve the talking points of the establishment, of the United States establishment, whether it was corporations or government. He was on very different reforms of reforming the oligarchy, reforming the rigid system of consolidation of power by corporations in that country, and permitted the Communist Party to operate openly, which definitely infuriated the U.S. government, of course, because then that released their control of power in that particular country, where, God forbid, people actually have their own elected governments, their own elected officials that they actually vote in, instead of being puppet dictatorships or puppet governments that the United States, that the interests of the United States that they serve. But this case was different. And one company in particular, the corporation that was came to known as banana republics, these particular countries which run on particular exports such as bananas, coffee, and other exports that are majority of them that are exported, which was the United Fruit Company, United Fruit Corporation, which had control of stakes of land in that particular area of Guatemala, and were definitely fit to lose millions of dollars if the President Jacobo Arbenz continued being president in that particular country, which didn't fit the interests of the corporation, United Fruit Company, or the U.S. government in general. So the U.S. government decided to fund opposition groups to overthrow that government and then put their own leader in power in replace of that president who was in place, which was Jacobo Arbenz, who was severely anti-corporatist, anti-corporations, or just completely the antithesis of the United States interests of the United States or commercial interests of those corporations that were in power. Now, the difference is that the U.S. government continues to say that we don't fund coups, we don't fund these particular operations, which is completely ridiculous. There are several other examples. You could just count Iraq, Iran, which we'll get into in a minute, several other countries overseas, say Lebanon, Syria, all of these different places, even throughout the history back then and also to the present now, currently. There are so many examples of this, but we'll go into a few just for you to get started on this aspects of the U.S. supporting coups that are against the interests of the United States, where they take out leaders that don't fit the bill of the U.S. government. Democratically elected governments that don't fit the United States agenda or the corporation's agenda in that country, which ended in 1954, the coup, which was actually hailed by the United States as such a success that the president, Jacobo Arbenz, stepped down and put a puppet leader in place of him in Guatemala, which was hailed as such a success by the U.S. government because now they have their own puppet government in power to serve the interests of the corporations and also the interests of the U.S. government to influence that particular area of the world. Now, we're switching gears to another example that people should know about, which really was recently declassified around August of 2013, was Operation Ajax. Now, Operation Ajax was in 1953, which really goes into the history of where the conflict started with Iran and the United States. Now, most people assume, maybe even people watching this video, that would assume that the conflict started in 1979 with the Iran hostage negotiations in the embassy where the American citizens were held for over 400 days in captivity. Now, that's a side issue on that front, but this is where the real history of the anti-Americanism that sprung up in that particular country, Iran, started with this CIA operation in 1953. Now we're going to break this down, and I definitely encourage people to share this video and to learn more about these particular events, that the implications of these events and how they serve the interests of not just the U.S. government, but also the interests of money, politics, war. It all comes together in this particular area. It's all under the question of cui bono. Who benefits most from these particular operations, and who comes out on the other side as the beneficiary, whether it's money, power, influence, all of that. So again, we'll go into Ajax, Operation Ajax, which was headed by current Roosevelt, one of Roosevelt's, I believe, cousins, or at least related to Theodore Roosevelt. But it all starts with the London financier William D'Arcy in 1908 striking oil in Iran. And then it leads to the British Empire controlling the elements of Iran for ended up signing agreements related with oil interests, gas, etc. Now, when this leader named Mossadegh, who was the fall guy in all of this, who was democratically elected by the people of Iran and overthrown and replaced with the U.S.-backed government, which was the Shah of Iran before the 1979 hostage crisis. Most people don't know that, or the mainstream media wouldn't report that, because that doesn't fit the narrative or fit the agenda, because that would completely destroy the narrative that Iran is the enemy and the U.S. are the good guys in this fight. Now, going back to with Mossadegh and this history of it, where he nationalized, he put elements in place to nationalize the industry, the oil industry in that country. Now, of course, that doesn't benefit corporations because they won't receive the money or the contracts related with the government, that they don't have the lobbying power to get what they want, whether it's land or power or influence in that particular country. It goes back to the Operation Guatemala that I mentioned earlier. it doesn't fit the agenda of corporations or the U.S. government. So they decide to basically hire moderate rebels in Iran to sabotage, to attack, destroy targets in that area. Basically a CIA operation, sanctions, economic warfare, anything you could think of related to disruption or destabilization of that particular country, which is Iran in this part. And with this operation, it really implicates the idea, it really puts the idea in the power, saying, going back to the beginning with the State Department spokesman, Jen Psaki, about this, saying that the U.S. government never sponsors coups, which is completely false, because they've been doing it for decades and decades, and up until now, with the influence of social media and the power of the internet, we're able to recognize and look up these documents that the CIA declassifies or other elements of the government to show that this is exactly what happens, where the U.S. government does not work for the people. Of course, most people know that watching this video. But again, for those of you who don't know, based on the power and influence of war, politics, and money, and how it all intertwines, where most of the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned about in his farewell address really comes into fruition. A two-time Congressional Medal of Honor award winner, General Smedley Butler, who came out with a book called War is a Racket. Now, most people might not know about this book because they either haven't been taught it in school or haven't read it themselves. I highly encourage people to check it out. The links will be in the description below for the sources and also for this particular book, because it relates to how this Major General Smedley Butler spoke out against the war, spoke out against several things that he was involved with, where he was basically the puppet of the financial and military-industrial complex that really controls elements of the government to do their own bidding for their interests, not for the interests of the people. Now, this is talking about overthrowing governments in Guatemala to allow corporations to control elements of that government, basically buy up the entire country for pennies on the dollar, and then sell it, and then allow people to live on it with by giving the corporation back more money. But related with General Smedley Butler and how it's influenced with this case, it really puts it all in the full circle of how the military industrial complex, the financial industrial complex, all of these different things really come together and show who really controls elements of the U.S. government to serve their interests. And this quote really is powerful in that sense. It's the first line in the book in chapter 1. I highly encourage people to read it, and it's really informative and powerful from someone who's on the inside, who was anti-war, who spoke out against these particular things because he saw how the military was used to do the bidding of corporations, people who control the U.S. government, financial interest, any other people involved like that. But this quote is, war is a racket. It always has been. It is possibly the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious. It is the only one international in scope. It's the only one in which the profits are reckoned in dollars and the losses in lives. Now, propaganda is so influenced with this, not just this, but also where the doublespeak that the State Department press secretary can come out, the spokesperson for this, and say that the U.S. government does not sponsor coups. We have a long-standing policy to not sponsor coups.
These latest accusations, like all previous such accusations, are ludicrous. As a matter of long-standing policy, the United States does not support political transitions by non-constitutional means. Political transitions must be democratic, constitutional, peaceful, and legal.
Which is completely false. Based on just some of the examples that I gave you in this video, and also other examples that you could look up, there are several other examples that I can't just fit in this one video, but we'll do other videos based on these particular cases. And it relates to how how journalism has become censorship, how the journalism has become the lapdog of the media establishment, where has been the lapdog of the government, where the media establishment, which is controlled by a few small corporations, does the bidding of the U.S. government related to propaganda, how war is propagandized to the general public, and how it's fed for public consumption for most people through the filters of the mainstream media. And we've done also interviews about this, people like Amber Lyon, who spoke out against journalism corruption related to Bahrain and the stories that she was covering. And also we broke down the story of American Sniper and how it was propaganda in itself, where missing pieces of history that should be in there, and it's not, because it's purposely left out for people to fit a small narrative, where the U.S. government and people like that want people to believe this certain segment and not the other segments that aren't taught, say operations like Operation Ajax or the Guatemala operation with the United Fruit Company. You wonder why most of these issues aren't taught in schools for that reason. So again, what do you think about this? Let us know what you think in the comment section about this video and also the other videos that I mentioned related with the journalists who were on the inside and spoke out against it. Also, our breakdown of the American Sniper video that if you haven't seen, I definitely encourage people to check it out. Again, let us know what you think in the comment section below. Don't forget to subscribe for all of our videos. We have many more videos coming soon about these topics, interviews related with other topics such as whistleblowers, government corruption, and so much more. Again, thanks everybody for watching, and stay tuned for more videos coming soon.